Good evening, members, guests, everybody watching remotely. Welcome to this first meeting of the Corporate Services Climate Change and Scrutiny Management Committee, the first meeting of this new municipal cycle. Welcome to returning members and to new members of this committee. We start with housekeeping. The toilets are just behind me at this end of the room. I'm not aware of any fire alarm that's planned, so if there is an alarm, the exits are clearly marked, and we'll make our way down to the ground floor. If there are guests who are here for particular agenda items, do feel free to leave after we finish our agenda item. Please leave via that door rather than through the back door. I've had apologies from Councillor Rowley, who hasn't nominated a substitute. So if we begin with declarations of interest, do any members have any interest they would like to declare? Councillor Burton.
I think I have a non-registerable interest that I should declare, which is that I contributed to the planning application consultation on the Castle Gateway, asking for disabled parking spaces to be retained. So I just wanted to make that clear.
No, that's absolutely fine. I think I was on the planning committee that considered the various aspects of it, so I think we've all had an interest in one way or another. Any other interests? No?
Yes.
Yes, sorry, Councillor.
Yeah, a similar interest, because I also contributed to documents related to Castle Gateway and my involvements in various voluntary groups relating to transport are pertinent to consultation there.
Great. Thank you very much. Anybody else? No. Agenda item 2 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of March. I think I'm the only person here who was at that meeting. And as far as I'm concerned, the minutes are fine. A member's happy to take my word for the fact that I think the minutes are fine. Go on, please. Thank you very much. I'll take that as consent. Do you want me to sign the minutes, Jane?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, agenda item 3, public participation. We have 4 speakers registered this evening, 1 via Zoom and 3 who are with us in person. So I'll invite, first of all, Flick Williams, who is joining us via Zoom, who would like to speak in relation to agenda items 4 and 5. Can you hear us, Flick?
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. So you have 3 minutes and I'll leave you to start when you're ready.
My aim this evening is to fill in some of the missing information regarding the Castle Gateway project before you. The planning application was submitted and comments closed on 8th of April last year. I would invite members to revisit the planning portal reference 22/00209 FULM. There you will find 38 objection comments, very many of them from disabled people, including York Disability Rights Forum. The previous administration had intended to take the decision to Planning Committee in either July or August last year, according to the project blog. But following arguably the largest ever protest in the city by disabled people at the foot of Clifford's Tower on the 2nd of July, it didn't do that, instead kicking it into the long grass labelled too difficult. So whether the issue of blue badge parking is now defined as a challenge or a problem, the fact remains that Castle is the closest ground level car park to the amenities of the city centre. It is an inconvenient truth for the net zero agenda that for many disabled and older people, their private vehicle is not a 2-ton wheelchair. It is a mobile life support system used for medical needs, as a toileting facility, a feeding station, a place of safety, and a means of emergency egress, and must be close by. Off-road parking is just as important as on-street spaces. Different disabled people have different vehicles and different requirements, and any changes to access to the foot streets does not alter this. Parking a private vehicle for those eligible with protected characteristics is a reasonable adjustment by law. The scheme in its current iteration also places blue badge parking inappropriately surrounded by sets where the Hilton Hotel currently enjoys loading space. We can anticipate they will continue business as usual, meaning these spaces would be widely abused, unavailable to blue badge holders, and recreate the problems experienced at Duncan Place. This is an example of the often seen trait in urban planning, summarised as, in theory, this will work. The scheme would also see blue badge holders lose the ability to park on the double yellow lines that surround the eye and lose the ability to be dropped off or collected by taxi or others to either the Castle Museum or the Crown Court. We were surprised that no objection to this was raised by the museum at a time when restoration of visitor numbers was their priority. The proposal to build a multi-storey car park on St George's Field may be well and truly dead, but reference in this report to the ability to expand the amount of parking here makes no difference whatsoever to blue badge holders. It is simply too far away. There just is nowhere else for re-provision other than the castle site itself. Returning to the planning portal, a resident writes, "I beg you to run out of money before you touch the Eye of York." Is that not exactly where we are? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Williams. So our next public speaker is Gwen Swinburne. Gwen would like to come to the table. I understand you're speaking in relation to the general remit of the committee.
Yes, Joe. Can I just first ask that members please try and raise their voices when they're speaking, because it's really hard to hear back here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, fair point. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I am disappointed to see no scrutiny on officer decision recording and what I consider to be a regular abuse of these, as well as key decision making and recording. I live in hope. Chair, well-run open councils have a comprehensive long-term forward plan reported to executive and corporate scrutiny as a standard item. The purpose of this at scrutiny is obviously to give you plenty of time to prepare and undertake a pre-scrutiny call-in or decide not to. Sadly, City of York officers, as so often, have a minimalist approach. 1 month with 3 scant columns, which are as good as useless. I have asked exec, and I am asking you here, to have a regular item with the full forward plan. I would ask you adopt the North Yorkshire model, which is more detailed and also includes forward council officer decisions, major procurements, grant applications and awards, etc. Next, I admit to being quite perplexed by the report on consultation this evening and its status. I will, however, simply say that it seems extraordinary that the author completely ignores the talk about panel, perhaps because it is not fit for purpose and should never be used, least of all for opinion or customer performance metrics or views. Please, can you address this as a significant failure? Members, there is a simple solution to the consultation across the council. Before any statutory or non-statutory consultation, managers should fill in a required consultation template, easy contents, purpose, aims, questions, who to be consulted, checkbox, which consultation methods to be used, checkbox, method of analysis, scoring, where to report and when, where will the consultation be retained, budget, responsible manager, responsible executive member. These should be held as officer decision records at minimum, but as an annex for all key and sensitive reports. I stand ready, as always, to help. Finally, it is worrying to see that items on some scrutiny committees are not being written by independent scrutiny officers, but by the very officers being scrutinised. This gives little confidence that an impartial report is presented. What happened to proper scrutiny and our scrutiny officers? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms Swinburne. Our third speaker this evening is Andy de Gorn. Would you like to come to the table, Mr. de Gorn? And you two have 3 minutes, and you're speaking to us about agenda item 4.
That's correct.
Okay.
Whilst I recognise the new administration needs to review previous spending commitments, including development of Castle Mills site, we shouldn't lose sight of the vision and ambition for this key part of our city centre and the significant economic importance of high quality public realm, as emphasised in the Simpsons City Beautiful report and Bill Grimsey's work on the future of towns and city centres. Whilst the report acknowledges the absence of levelling up funding, page 20 of the paper headed Funding Sources makes clear that external funding is in place to enable creation of public open space behind Castle Museum, together with a new walking and cycling bridge across the River Foss onto Piccadilly. Tower Street crossing not only has funding, the design has also been approved by myself last December, and I had expected would now be in place. Private sector investment in Piccadilly has been significant and could be boosted further if the council progresses work to open up this route and a boardwalk along the river to the new public space, which might also be done at the same time. A new administration should commit to this new public park or open space around Clifford's Tower, which would very much complement the forthcoming transport strategy. Reduced car movements in this part of the city centre would help improve bus reliability and its attractiveness. Since this issue was last discussed over a year ago, more accurate monitoring of parking levels in council car parks has been implemented, and this data needs to be published and carefully assessed to identify any unused replacement capacity around the city centre. This should enable a planned transition for the area around Clifford's Tower into public space for relaxation, play and planting to enhance the setting of Riverbank and Clifford's Tower alongside a higher level of blue badge parking than has previously been proposed, as the previous speaker mentioned. Recent surpluses on car parking income should be used to cushion any short-term reduction in income from trial closures, which have been talked about previously, for some or all of the current car park, along with good, clear signing to alternative car parks, so as to be able to monitor the impact of any such changes. This, I believe, combined with greater promotion of park and ride services, would help support the move towards less car travel within the city centre, whilst maintaining business confidence in the changes that I believe will be outlined in the transport strategy later this month.
Thank you, Mr. de Gorn. And last but not least, could I invite Phil Bixby to come and join us at the table? And Phil will be talking to us about agenda item 5, I think. So you have, yes, so your 3 minutes start now. Thank you.
Thank you. Paragraph 12 of the report to this committee sets out the difference between consultation, co-production and citizen empowerment. Sometimes consultation is appropriate, but the limitation of consultation and tools such as questionnaires is that they assume that the responses to specific questions and the statistics they generate are a sound basis for decision making. If we're to deal with systemic challenges we're facing as a city, what we really need are long-term creative engagement processes that enable co-production and citizen empowerment. We learned a lot through running My York Central and My Castle Gateway. I'd like to draw out what seem to be 3 useful steps in a co-productive and citizen empowerment approach to public engagement. First step is to ask really open questions. What matters to you? What would you like to be able to do? Where would you like to be able to go? And what would that be like and feel like? These open questions are a way of enabling imaginative, creative thinking. Open questions move the public conversation onwards from what works or doesn't work now towards identifying connections between key themes and sketching out future possibilities. This first step will inevitably generate challenges, disagreement, and complexity. But it leads to a second stage where these complex challenges are open for debate, informed equally by technical and professional expertise and local knowledge and lived experience. This is about enhancing our city's shared abilities to listen, to disagree well, to learn, to compromise, and to make change. If questionnaires extract opinion, which has not yet been given the chance to become more richly informed, then this instead builds a process of informed, grown-up debate. The second phase can more richly inform policy, but crucially, it leads to the third and final phase. It generates networks across council, public agencies, business, community groups, and people for making change together. Engagement through talk and through action can be directly connected. An effective transport strategy that meets carbon reduction, air quality, and active travel ambitions needs to bring together improved infrastructure with people making different choices about how they move around. We need engagement processes that lead to this type of whole system change. This approach resonates strongly with elements of the council's existing work. The council is already connected with every part of the city through its everyday work and is already using a citizen empowerment approach through the work of its local area coordinator teams. York has incredible voluntary, creative and education sectors, which are also well connected into all parts of the city. We can use this three-step engagement process at all scales and for all issues, but to really get to grips with our multiple emergencies of climate, biodiversity and social and economic inequality, it would help us to design a whole city, whole system approach to local democracy, where the council uses an engagement for action approach and becomes a facilitator and coordinator of citizen-led transformation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bang on 3 minutes. Thank you for your comments. So that brings us on to agenda item 4, which is the Castle Gateway update. If I can invite Neil Ferris and Catherine Daly to join us, and also Councillor Kilbane, if you'd like to come to table as well. So welcome to executive members who are here this evening. It's something that I think in previous iterations of Scrutiny, we've had some meetings where there's been an open invitation to executive members, others less so, but I'm keen that executive members have the opportunity to attend these meetings, to take part in discussion, whilst obviously recognising this is a forum primarily for the Scrutiny members to have their say and to delve into some of these issues, but you're very welcome. We're also joined this evening by, excuse me, Catherine Blacker, who's Chief Executive of York Museums Trust, and Simon Bean, who's the Regional Manager from English Heritage. Again, another thing that Scrutiny aspires to do, doesn't always succeed, is to involve partners in discussions such as this, so that they can participate or even listen to what's being said and sort of chip in as they wish. But you're very welcome to observe or to participate. It's entirely up to you. So if I can ask Neil and Catherine to introduce themselves, but I suppose just to set by way of context, we as a committee, we often receive reports on major projects, because that is where this is a committee where major projects are reported on, and we have an opportunity to take a high-level overview as to how a project is going or not, what the opportunities are, what the risks are. In any major project, there will be some very sort of detailed issues that may be picked up in other committees. So this is where we try to take a sort of a high-level view, but hopefully tease out some issues and have a productive discussion that can help move things forward. So having spoken about that, if I can ask Neil and Catherine firstly to introduce yourselves, and then to introduce the paper, which I'm sure we've all read. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Neil Ferris, Corporate Director of Place, and the Castle Gateway project falls under my remit.
Catherine Daly, Catherine Daly, Head of City Development. I've fairly recently joined Tracy Carter's team in housing, economy and regeneration. So I'll be involved in this project moving forwards.
Thank you, Chair. So this report in front of you is about a key area of the city that has formed an ongoing ambition since I think the prison was demolished pre-war, turned into a car park post-war and has effectively functioned alongside what is one of the city's most iconic features in terms of the Clifford's Tower, of which English Heritage has made a significant investment in recent years. So it's been an ongoing aspiration for city councillors to develop this area to be more friendly in terms of its environment. We saw a retail project come forward in the late 90s, early 2000s, that which effectively to fund the project was ended up with overdevelopment and didn't make itself forward, and that project collapsed. Members decided to take forward decisions to bring the site forward, and this evening's presentation that I'll get Catherine to walk through is just the decisions that members have taken in recent years for the project that is in front of us now as an authority, consider what has changed since those decisions was taken by executive, and then our current expectation of has been put upon us by the current executive is that they would like to receive a report in November in respect to this issue, and Councillor Gilbane can consider those future decision pieces. So if I pass over to Catherine to review.
Thanks, Neil. Hopefully in your packs you'll have a copy of the slides attached to the report as Annex 1. So I'll just walk you through those slides. There's about a dozen in total. And then obviously at the end, happy to take any questions that you've got. Probably rely on Neil for the historic some of the details. It's quite a complex project with quite a lot of component parts, but I'll talk through the slides and then we'll take questions afterwards. So the first slide is just a summary of the original aims of the master plan. So really, as Neil said, this project has regeneration objectives at its heart. There's 8 listed on the slide, but essentially can be summarised under 3 key areas of focus. So the key one is around unlocking the heritage potential of the area, given the significant heritage assets in this part of the city. And obviously we've got 2 partners here tonight who have an interest in 2 of those. The second area of focus is around unlocking economic potential of the area, really making the area more usable, more productive for residents and for businesses, delivering housing, delivering commercial solutions. And then the third kind of focus of the original aims was around improving sustainable links to the city centre and reducing traffic within the inner ring road. Second slide is around the components of the Castle Gateway scheme. So we talk about this as Castle Gateway and it can sound like one project, but it's actually a series of interlinked schemes. So the Castle and Eye of York is at the heart of the master plan. And that's the area that we've talked about is around provision of high quality public realm, really to celebrate those heritage assets and improving those linkages that I've just talked about. And the other components that sit around that are really a series of linked projects that were envisaged as enablers to help fund and deliver the heart of the master plan. So we've got them listed on there. We've got Castle Mills, which was envisaged in the original business case as coming forward as council development of the site for residential apartments to help fund other elements of the master plan. St George's Field car park, which the original master plan identified as having potential to deliver a new multi-storey car park. Excuse me. Piccadilly, which we've obviously got a meanwhile use on that site currently for Spark, but longer term development or disposal was anticipated as a revenue generator, again, to support delivery of the wider master plan. And also the Foss Basin area, where there was apartments and also commercial space envisaged on that section. So lots of elements coming together under the Castle Gateway heading. The next slide is really just an overview of the fantastic engagement that took place, which has been an ongoing conversation since 2017. And really just a reminder that that was very much this bottom-up approach of My Castle Gateway, and the designs were developed through that engagement as an iterative process with the residents and the key stakeholders of York. Next slide is really just a brief history of decision making. So you'll see reports listed on there over a period of seven years. Started out as the Southern Gateway. Significant activity between 2018 and 2020 to develop what we now know as the Castle Gateway Master Plan. And then obviously we had a pause through the COVID pandemic. And then most recently, a report taken to exec last summer with a number of recommendations that we set out on the following 2 slides. So the first 3 recommendations related to the Castle Mills element of the project. I don't intend to read those in detail. You'll hopefully be able to see those and will have read them. But essentially it related to the termination of a contract with Waits, delegated authority to procure a construction partner to complete the design, and then authority to proceed with some statutory work in relation to the bridge. And then on the second page of recommendations, you'll see that there was approval given to submit a levelling up bid and to be ready to progress with procurement if that was successful. And then on St George's Field, given the uncertainty around Castle Mills costs at the time, the decision was deferred on the building of the multi-storey car park. So that's where we're up to in terms of decisions by the council. The next slide outlines the funding position and a reminder that it was never a fully funded scheme because it was very much built upon the enabling elements funding the final piece of the master plan. But as one of our speakers noted, at the bottom, there is confirmation that the Active Travel Fund and the West Yorkshire Transport Fund monies were secure. The Levelling Up Fund application was unsuccessful in both rounds. So we then go on to a handful of slides really about what's changed since that baseline position last summer. So it won't be a surprise that scheme costs across all the projects have gone up. We know about inflation and the levels those are now at, and essentially the sales market for what were planned on Castle Mills for the apartments is not matching the cost inflation for the delivery of that scheme. So that's reduced the revenue generation potential at Castle Mills that was obviously intended to then fund other parts of the master plan. Again, as we all know, interest rates have significantly increased, which impacts on the council's potential borrowing costs, and again impacts on the original business case. So due to the reduced revenue generation potential that we've talked about and the increased risk associated with the council delivering those schemes, I think it's fair to say that they can't be relied upon in the same way as enablers which support the delivery of that wider master plan. We also note on that scheme that there have been changes to national building regulations in June this year, which does have potential implications for the Castle Mills scheme. It's very technical, don't ask me any questions on that. It's about ceiling heights and ventilation. The next slide is a continuation of other things that have changed. So the parking position at St George's Field, there's been some changes there, and essentially that means that more surface level area is available than we originally envisaged in the business case. Essentially that's because the Foss Basin apartments can't progress due to strong Environment Agency objections due to the flood zone, but also improvement works that the Environment Agency are doing on that site needs to take less spaces than we originally envisaged. And I think there's a general recognition that there may be potential to look again at how St George's Field is used if the multi-storey car park isn't delivered. So how it's currently used for coach parking, and is that the best use of space on a car park so close to the city centre? Or could we be looking at alternative coach drop-off and parking solutions to release more surface level parking for families and residents who want to use the city centre? final page of what's changed. So we just note the significant private sector investment that's come forward in the Piccadilly area since the master plan was released. Again, I won't go through the list, but there's 4 or 5 on there that have now come and been built or have permission. The Coppergate one-way system has been implemented, and then there was a decision taken around the disposal of the Piccadilly site to a registered provider to deliver a 100% affordable housing scheme, although we note that the marketing of the site hasn't yet generated sufficient interest to take that forward. So what this means for Castle Gateway, essentially, as I've said a couple of times, the enabling projects that we envisaged at Castle Mills, Piccadilly and Foss Basin are less able to financially support the heart of the master plan. As I've also said, there's potential to look at ways of increasing the surface level parking capacity at St George's Field compared to the original business case. Although this would still leave a reduction in spaces compared to the original approach, but with potential to increase as we've talked through. And there's obviously a key dependency still within the overall project around parking provision, including the blue badge parking provision that we heard the speaker talk about earlier, and also the parking income that's generated through the Castle Mills. Sorry, Castle Car Park, not Castle Mills. Final slide then is really just about the current position. So as Neil said, officers are currently working on a review of the scheme, looking at all those individual components and drawing up some options for next steps. And we're targeting a decision report in November to bring back to exec to agree a way forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you, Neil. So there are no specific questions that are being posed to us for consideration this evening. We're asked to note the update, but I'm sure members will have questions or comments they might want to raise, which hopefully will help the work that's underway to develop recommendations that, as has been mentioned, will be coming forward for a decision in November. So if I can ask members to indicate if they'd like to ask a question. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that opening statement with the report. At risk of sounding flippant, I've got the council's financial position very much in mind. So I think one question I've got is, what's the cost or the risk of just doing nothing with this? You know, it's obviously a very admirable, attractive idea and vision and all the rest of it, but we're also hearing in parallel about all the pressures that the council's under. So is this now on the nice to have list rather than the must have list? I mean, I don't think that's a controversial question to ask, really, in the current context. So it'd be interesting to know where that leaves us if we just left it.
Who'd like to have a go at that? I'm guessing do nothing is always an option.
Do nothing is an option. It always is an option for members to make their decisions. It's a question of the consequences of those decisions. A significant amount of funds have been spent on developing the planning permissions, undertaking the development work with weights, etc. The planning permission for the St George's Car Park. So to deliver no asset at all would effectively incur a potential recharge to revenue for that spend, because you don't end up with an asset at the end of the exercise. So there is a risk in that regard of a financial recharge to revenue. I think more proactively and optimistically, there's the risk that we don't seize the opportunity that the city, multiple executives have had to have a more useful use of this space for and on behalf of the city and its residents. So with a new mayoral combined authority, potentially a new government in years to come, there will be funding opportunities, and York is a fantastic place to invest in. So to have a and I hate to use the phrase, but it is widely used in the parlance, a shovel-ready scheme, I think would be an asset that we could work on from a York perspective, and would not require us to take that capital expenditure back to revenues, because effectively you'd still got an intent to deliver the project.
So just Councillor Burton indicated, is it a supplementary or a new question? Ask it anyway, and then
Okay, I was just wondering.
Right.
Sorry, within the plans, and within these papers, you've seen that they've recognised the challenge of provision of blue badge parking. And I know that the Civic Trust Transport Advisory Group had identified 30 places that could be provisioned within the Castle Gateway. So I just wondered, have you incorporated that or thought about that anymore?
Definitely, we've had ongoing thoughts about it, and it will be for executive to determine if that's what they wish to make as a criteria for the scheme going forward. So it's absolutely deliverable, and it's something that we have considered, but it will be ultimately for members to determine what the whole project looks and feels like after the decision-making process. Just to be clear, the current planning application that was referred to by one of the speakers was based upon a previous iteration of sort of expected outcomes for the site, also based upon the ambition of the levelling up funding potentially coming forward, also based upon the fact that the Castle Mills site could have generated a significant surplus for the authority. It was also originally premised on a bigger multi-storey car park, which would have been better value for money in terms of the spaces it created. So there's a number of fundamental issues that have changed, but clearly it would be for the new executive to determine what their requirements are.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's this knock-on effect, isn't it? And I know that there was parking provisions around the court area there as well.
That's correct. In one of the designs that was proposed.
Yeah.
Councillor Healy, you had a supplementary to Councillor Taylor's question. Microphone, please. And speak up, please.
I think that point made by Councillor Taylor. How much money are we talking about being recharged back to revenue this year? And would that be in the case of a cancellation? If you paused it, would that not trigger that event?
A pause wouldn't trigger the event if there was still an intent from council to deliver the overall outcomes and assets. I mean, it would be a matter for the authority's finance officer to take a judgment call on that as to how realistic it was that something was going to be delivered. But my understanding of it would be that no, it wouldn't require it immediately if there was still an intent to deliver. I think after a number of years of passage, there might be a different perspective taken on it by a finance officer, but with a new mayoralty, a new government, etc., there still seems to me a reasonable expectation that the project could be funded. So that's where I would say my sort of perspective of feeding into the finance officer's views would be. In terms of the spend today, the total spend to date is 4.4 million.
Thank you. Is that a supplementary, Councillor? Yeah.
It was just a final bit about that one. So if there's no capital asset at the end, then it's rechargeable. If the site was sold, could the capital receipt be used to offset that costs, or would you still have to?
It would matter for members to offset what they use to offset what costs, and it's again budget issues are a matter of full council. But yes, you could, if the asset was sold, you could offset your revenue costs.
Thank you. Councillor Kelly, a new question.
Brilliant, thank you, and thank you very much for.
Let's just speak up.
Okay, can you hear me a bit better now? Is that okay? Yeah, thank you very much for the report. I think, to be honest, one of my questions has already been answered. So you said it cost 4.4 million on behalf of the council so far. When is that since? And then my other question was also relating to the funding, and it said that we'd been unsuccessful for the levelling up funding twice. So why have we been unsuccessful, and what options could we look at instead of that?
Thank you. So 2017, since effectively this particular iteration of the area is with when that expenditure's occurred. In terms of why were we unsuccessful, York was deemed to be in the least, well, I try to be politically correct here, the least desirable area to invest in terms of the levelling up fund, because they were deemed to be other areas that would take higher priority. So we were a level 3 area. So we always knew that it was ambitious when we were applying for the levelling up funds. But I think what we did working with economists, and part of those costs are the application costs for these bids. I mean, it's been a point made by members over the years that continually bidding for one-off pieces of money from government doesn't come free, and they require more and more information to effectively justify the economic outcome. So I think when we looked at the economic outcome and the opportunities for Castle Gateway, we felt that there was a good opportunity there from our perspective as officers, and that's why we made the recommendations to members. But the cards were always, shall we say, stacked against us from a York perspective in that regard. It's also fair to say that levelling up is always very difficult when it comes to funding public realm. So Parliament Street, Carey Street, etc. All of those are really difficult items for us to demonstrate economic uplift. So the way the government runs its competitions for funding these days, the Treasury always requires that economic uplift piece, and how much economic uplift you get from a piece of public realm, notwithstanding its social outcomes, is very difficult to demonstrate.
Was the other aspect of your question answered?
No, so just following up the second part of my question, which was about what are the other options, and how much funding would we be looking for?
In terms of the other options for?
So the report says that obviously we were unsuccessful in that funding, so there's a gap. If we were going to pursue it, what are the other options?
Funding options. Yeah. Okay, sorry. So the funding options, clearly we've got a new combined authority with a mayor blessed with £18 million for the next 27 years, I think, till 2052. So there's a significant pot of money there that we'd expect York to get a significant proportion of, being I think 1/3 of the overall economic area is economic activity in the area is here in York. So one would hope that a mayor would look to seek to invest in York, and if that's a priority of the members of York, we would hope, and the citizens of York, one would hope the mayor would be cognizant of that. Also, a strong mayoral narrative leading on behalf of York and North Yorkshire could lead for additional funding pots in the future. So like the levelling up fund, we anticipate government will continue in that mode of giving out funding to local authorities, that York could benefit from such funding, because this is a project that has a significant bearing on an important part of the city.
Thank you. I think Councillor Taylor has a supplementary.
Thank you, Chair. I do hear you on those possibilities of other funding opportunities, but maybe I'm just getting cynical in my old age, but they seem quite hopeful. There's nothing really tangible about that, and through devolution, we're already getting a lot of help with the York Central development by making the enterprise zone last for longer. And so when I hear that, I'm thinking, well, how much more will we get out of these upcoming changes? And is that enough for us to work to? Is there enough there to play with for us to pursue it?
Who'd like to have a go at that?
I'll make a start while Casey, sorry, Councillor Lomas, I thought of the Lord Mayor then for a second. I think you're right, Councillor Taylor, is that we can't be putting all our hopes on the wishing on a never type thing. So I think whatever decisions we come to, we'll have to base it on what we know we can do here and now. So into that means that you've got to build in flexibility. So whatever projects we can afford to start on, we need to get the project moving, as you've heard, in no uncertain terms tonight. But whatever we do start to work on, we need to build it in so that we can adapt and change and be ambitious as as those possibilities arise. I think crucial to it, and I'll let Councillor Lomas come in on this, is that actually we do not need to start thinking of these projects as being de-linked now, and think about how do we make each one work, because clearly the cross-funding isn't there anymore. So let's start to think about them as specific pieces of work that we can move forward with. But I'll hand over to Councillor Lomas.
Thank you. I think it's no secret the financial position we're in. So many people sitting around this table have heard me talk about it quite a lot. And while, of course, we're going to pursue any options for alternative funding sources for any and all of the ambitions we have for the city, there is a reality to it. And Councillor Kilbane's quite right. It's important to have a scheme that we can deliver almost in a modular way, so that we can deliver what is needed for the city, but do it in a managed and controlled way, so that we're not overextending ourselves and that we don't end up in the position that so many other councils are ending up in at the moment, where they overextend themselves and cannot meet their obligations. So we'll be looking at this and looking at what is possible, what can we do, and trying to be as ambitious as possible with the intention to secure whatever funding we can. But I think we have to be realistic that, there isn't a magic money tree. Wish there was, that would be nice. And we have to make sure that whatever we are able to deliver is sustainable.
Thank you. I've got lots of hands, some of which might be supplementary, some of which might be new, but I think we're all into the realms of discussing sort of deliverability and potential obstacles to deliverability. So I'll bring people in as I've seen them. I suppose just one quick question from me. Catherine mentioned the two elements, the active travel and the West Yorkshire Combined Authority elements of the scheme are funded. Do those elements have strings attached that would make it difficult for us to utilise that funding if it weren't part of a bigger project, or do we have some flexibility to invest those in some specific active travel related improvements?
They are principally schemes about improving transport and active travel. And to the extent that we ensure that whatever design is approved going forwards continues to deliver the active travel and transport outcomes, I think the phased approach that members have talked about would mean that they would be fundable. We would clearly have to go back to the funders through WICA to update them as to a different approach. But I think in terms of the actual outcomes of those elements, they would still remain valid.
Okay. No, thanks. It's useful to understand that. Councillor Eyre.
Sort of ties into my other supplementary, well, it's about this de-linking. So I mean, that the West Yorkshire Transport Fund is a route to the Castle Mills site as part of the Castle Mills development. So in terms of delivering that without Castle Mills, I can't imagine the West Yorkshire Transport Fund would be giving money for a bridge to nowhere. And the second one about de-linking was, to what extent can you actually de-link all these schemes, given that the planning permission is tied to the delivery of Castle Mills and the closure of Castle Car Park?
So in terms of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority funding, the bridge and the route through the back of the museum was effectively to give permeability of cycling and walking through the site, not just to facilitate activity to the Castle Mills itself. But again, subject to members' decisions, we'd have to go back to WICA, but the expectation is that site won't just end up redundant and never have a purpose. So again, we'd have to take that into consideration in respect to the decisions that executive considered at the time. In respect to the de-linking of the project, I think they can be de-linked and considered separately, because they're no longer necessarily interlinked from a funding perspective if members decide not to take forward a more expensive option on the Castle Car Park. And the planning permissions was about the occupation of Castle Mills from recollection. So you can't occupy Castle Mills until Castle Car Park is closed. So it's possible that they are de-linked, but you still achieve that. So it depends on the sequencing of the de-linking and how you deliver it. And that would have to be, members would have to consider that in any report.
Thanks. Just a quick question on that. So presumably I suppose a new planning application could be submitted or a revised planning application for the.
Absolutely, a variation could be asked for, but
Yeah.
what I suppose, just to be clearer, you could close Castle Car Park and not deliver Castle Mills because you're not endeavouring to occupy a flat that has not been built.
Yeah, it's that
So
way round,
because it's that way round. And there is no planning permission as yet for the closure of Castle Car Park, but there is for the building of the multi-storey car park. So again, if you don't choose to build the multi-storey car park, then your planning application would be potentially entirely different for Castle Car Park. So they can be delinked, but these are choices, decisions for different committees of council to consider.
Do you want to come in on that, Councillor Culdain?
Yeah, just for absolute clarity for anybody listening or watching, we do not intend to build a multi-storey car park in St George's Field. And the other aspect is that yes, the site of the bridge going across the foss is given due to the drainage on the other side of the foss and not being able to build over that. So I mean that is relatively straightforward, and we are absolutely committed to delivering that bridge to make that connection. We'll need to talk to partners about how that might work if that's changed from where we were originally, but I can't see it's changed that much. So the commitment to build that bridge remains, and also the commitment to build 100% affordable housing on council owned land remains, and it is council owned land, and that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, lots of hands. I'm going to try and get everybody in. Councillor Widdowson.
I was just going back to a previous point, so apologies. We're getting the devolution deal through. So the first year is 18 million, and I know there's lots of plans in how North Yorkshire and York would spend that, and then years going forward, there's more money coming down the line. Is this scheme on that list? And if it is on that list, whereabouts and what are the ideas around it from the mayoral combined authority?
Well, I'll pass to the member in a moment, but just to be clear, we don't currently have a combined authority or a mayor. So as to what a list is, it will be a matter for that new mayor and combined authority. But in terms of the ambition, it's always been an ambition that's been within the context of the mayor combined authority. But just to be clear, we don't have a statutory combined authority. We have a devolution deal, 18 million. What the funding actually goes forward thereafter will be a matter for the mayor and the combined authority in the voting arrangements.
I absolutely agree, Neil, but there is also a list already being produced by the LEP, and it is being ranked and it is being talked about. So that was where my question was.
If I might just, sorry, Councillor Kilbane, just to be clear, that's just a list produced by an officer. It's not ratified by anybody until it becomes a combined authority or a joint committee decision that is what the prioritised investment list is. It just remains a long list of possibilities.
Thank you. Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chair, and thank officers for the report. I've got a couple of questions and I'll just go through them and then hand over to you, if that's okay, Chair. I wanted to ask about the level of funding contributed by the enabling schemes towards the heart of the master plan. There's no real detail on what the changes to the Eye of York and that area described as the heart of the master plan, how much of that could be delivered by no enabling schemes? Are there any low-hanging fruit elements towards the Eye of York improvements that we could see? Second question is about the 17 to 21 Piccadilly marketing. If you could just give us any more explanation of what we're trying to achieve there and why it's not landing, why there's no interest as described in the report. A little quick comment about shovel-ready schemes. I do totally understand the need to have shovel-ready schemes, but I'd also try to understand the reasonability of putting in bids for levelling up fund, because from the outside, you know, when those bids were drafted and submitted, you could say that York at that point in time would be low down on the priority list. That's not to say we shouldn't give it a go, but at what cost is it to say we've put in 2 bids to levelling up fund? What cost to the council for doing that? Because, you know, looking at that in reasonable terms with the government's factors for deciding, you'd say that York's low down. And then finally, we are putting options to executive in November. I guess from Scrutiny Committee perspective, I'd like to see all what I've described as low-hanging fruit elements of the scheme mapped out so that there are some genuine options to do phase 1 improvements. You know, that there are low-level cost improvements that I know could be made. So can they all be considered, or are you going to just wrap it up into a different type of project report for executive to consider? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kilbane has given a strong indication and steer that the authority won't be delivering a £15 million multi-storey car park. Clearly that decision's for executive to make, but I'll take that as a given from Councillor Kilbane. So on that basis, the money that was originally intended for Castle Mills in terms of the development of that site was principally to fund the multi-storey car park. Okay, yeah, sorry, principally to fund the multi-storey car park, because that was the significant piece of infrastructure needed to provide alternative parking capacity for the closer Castle car park. So there are opportunities to reconfigure the St George's Field car park. As Catherine highlighted in the presentation, there's opportunities to take the coach car parking out of there and make that a coach drop-off, which increases your car parking numbers on St George's Field. So that to a degree could members' decision compensate for a closure of Castle car park, again reflecting the question earlier, members' ambition as to what a closure looks like. How does that address the blue badge parking issue? So again, a member decision on that. So and again, Councillor Kilbane's made a commitment. The executive will ultimately determine, but to deliver the Wyker Bridge. So there are opportunities for low-hanging fruit deliverability. Again, these are member decisions to be made. So I'll refer to Councillor Kilbane to fill in the blanks, but I'll just go through the questions as you've asked them. 17 to 21, the marketing of that was for a affordable housing provider. We had only one very speculative bid that didn't address the requirements that executive required of us at the time. So officers haven't taken that forward. In terms of the cost of bids, they generally of this scale are in the low thousands for us to ask for those, put those bids forwards. But we don't just dream up bids as officers to put forward. They generally reflect a executive decision, or when a mayoralty comes forward and puts forward a list of ambition, we work on the decisions that have executive or full council have made in terms of their ambition, but don't have the budgets to do so. So it's not a speculative bid in that regard. And again, the scale of ambition is a member decision as to how speculative you wish to be. These are choices for members to make. And in terms of the options for November, we'll be working with members and Councillor Douglas to frame that report within necessary advice for members to make the decisions they wish to do so going forward, and ensure that the advice within the report is sufficient for members to make
those decisions.
Anything else to add? Councillor Loss hands.
I mean, just that, you know, in terms of the multi-storey car park, it was a 20th century solution to a 21st century problem. You know, we need to have much better ways of managing traffic and making sure that whatever happens on the site, we've still got the same amount of people coming into the city, because that's what matters to the city for its feel, and also to the businesses and the vibrancy of the place. So, you know, that's the challenge. And I think what we're trying to do as an executive is make sure that all of our strategies and goals line up and are all joined up and all make sense. So that's why around the same time, we'll be looking to consult on measures around the transport plan, for example, you know, so that all of those things do join up. What I can say, and again, sorry, I'm straying into Councillor Lomas's area here, really, is that whatever it is we decide to do, it's got to be doable. It's got to be achievable. I mean, we've been talking about Castle Gateway for a long time, but certainly since 2017, these things have been, you know, knocking about, and a lot of them wasn't delivered partly because it was trying to get those bids that we weren't really sure we were going to get. So, you know, let's make sure that whatever we do decide to do, we can deliver for the people of York.
Thank you. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. First questions were around revenue and income projections. So it's quite surprised on page 21 that you were talking about a reduction in the anticipated income from particular sales. That's kind of counterintuitive in terms of what we've had of the housing delivery programme. So the question is around, in 2020, we were projecting income of £42.5 million. Are we now suggesting 3 years on that the income from those apartments will be less than £42.5 million? And then my second question is, that was based on 80-20 split, I believe, in terms of market sale and affordable. So what would the income likely be on a 100% affordable scheme? And how does that sit across the design and build costs?
So I'm not going to attempt off the cuff to produce those detailed prices, but what I can say is that the page 21, the sales market for apartments not matching cost inflation. So effectively, the underlying costs have gone up significantly compared to the market for the flats. So effectively, the risk on the profitability of that scheme has increased. There's a marginal profitability, as you'll recollect, for the scheme. We discussed it at length. We've seen huge price inflation in the construction market. We've seen some significant flat projects in the city, just Hudson Quarter next door, Rydale House, where those flats haven't flown off the market at the prices that were expected. This has given a lot more uncertainty in the deliverability of the profitability that would have funded this project going forward. As for the other items, I'm sure that they will fall in terms of the specific values and costs. They'll form part of the report that goes to executive in terms of alternative costs, but we don't have them here today.
Right, because it was 42.5 million against a bill cost of 28.2 million, so a £14 million gap, and that was based on 80-20. So you would assume on those figures, with inflation even higher and that gap being even smaller, that any shift to 100% affordable will make that into a negative return. And that probably knocks on to the 1721 Piccadilly discussion, that wasn't deliverable at the price.
Members will make decisions based on the information that we put in front of them, and the costings will be as accurate as we can project at the point in time. I don't have those figures in front of me. To my knowledge, we've not produced those as yet.
What I can say, Councillor Eyre, though, is it's really tough. It's a really tough job to try and do, but the people of York need to be able to afford to live in their own city. And that's why we're going to try and do it.
Okay. Do you have a further question?
Move on. No. Someone else can come back?
No. If you, I'll bring others in, then I'll loop back. Councillor Merritt, sorry, you've been waiting a while.
It's all right. Some of my questions have been asked by yourself and Councillor Myers. Just going back to your question, Chair, about the other two sources of funding. You answered the question about whether the purpose was still valid. Are there any time limits on those? Or do we know that they're both remaining secure, given, for instance, Active Travel's England's substantial reduction in funding? I think that has taken place since this was previously agreed, if I'm not incorrect.
I'm unaware of any significant time constraints that would preclude delivery of the schemes with that funding should members decide to do so in executive in November.
Okay. Secondly, on the issue that Danny picked up, do you actually do business cases when you're considering putting in bids to the government and a risk assessment? And were those done for those two previous bids? Because I tend to share Danny's scepticism about the appropriateness of sticking in bids when it looks pretty much stacked to a failure before you put it in.
Well, in terms of business cases in the bids themselves, they're generally required by Treasury for us to put the business cases in, and we have to deal with the issues of risk, etc., within those business cases that we submit. In terms of, is there a business case to submit the bid? Then there's two parts to that. The first is, is this a decision that executive have decided that they wish to deliver, and for all officers to seek external funding for, so there's effectively a mandate to do so. Then there would be discussions with the executive members at that particular point in time. It's an ongoing relationship with the executive to say, is this something you wish to bid into? But I suppose it's a little bit like the lottery. If you've got an ambition for something and there is funding available, if you don't submit, you definitely won't get any funding.
Could I also ask, in terms of the review that's proposed, clearly there have been an awful lot of changes in various respects. Is this really going to be a fundamental review, or that really looks, is this the right set of objectives? Is this practical? What's the case for continuing or not continuing, as the case may be?
If I may, Chair. Yeah, thanks for that, Councillor Merritt. I think the important thing here is that we're in a position where we absolutely have to go through a fundamental review. This is a project that's been around for a while, hasn't been delivered. There are significant challenges with it. So, of course, we're going to do a proper review and look at what can be delivered, what is appropriate to deliver in the current circumstances. So that's what we'll be doing. And our expectation is that we will be looking at options for delivery in phases, doing things in the way that we've outlined in I've called modular way, which I think I've just made that up this evening, but a phased model, so that we can achieve things that are the low-hanging fruit that Councillor Myers was referring to quite quickly, that we can rule out the things like the multi-storey car park, which clearly is not, I don't think, in anyone's interest to go ahead with. And that those elements that might be more challenging or require external funding, that we can have a plan in place for moving towards that, so that we're not going to abandon the scheme, we're just going to look at how it's possible to deliver it.
Thank you. Bringing Councillor, did you want to come back on that?
Just to pick up on Councillor Lomas's point about phased delivery, it is something that the council is currently doing. So we're currently delivering the front of station gateway project on a phased basis, because when we got permission from the executive to commence that project, we weren't able to determine that we had all the land or the necessary consent to deliver it. So again, that was taken in a phased process to help manage risks. And again, the nature of the phasing, the risk profile, is something that the report has to highlight and bring to members, and members take the decision to proceed at what pace through the phases and what risk appetite they've got. But it is something that we have set precedents of happening now within the city.
Okay.
And if I can just add, obviously, to bring in the partners as well, any changes that do happen will be done in partnership. Everything we're going to do in this administration will be done in partnership mainly because we believe that's the right way to work, but also because we don't have the resources to do things entirely on our own. I think quite a lot of partners in the city are in the same situation. Well, we're in the very fortunate position with the Castle Gateway project, and praise to the previous administration for this, is that there's been a really good consultation on it, a really thorough consultation on it. So we've got a solid baseline for whatever decisions we make to work from in terms of what the people of York want.
Thank you. Right. Still got some hands to get through. Councillor Healy.
One very quick
microphone.
Right. One very quick question, and then one that's probably going to be slightly more involved. If you don't build the multi-storey car park, but you close the existing car park and you reconfigure it so you don't have coaches, what's the total number of lost spaces? If you don't know, just say you don't know.
Can I do my sentence?
Yeah, go on. Yeah, come back to me on that. Second question, just to remind myself, and probably for some of the new members, can you explain the difference between market housing, affordable housing, and social housing? And also, just, this is not specifically to this side, but in general, to build affordable housing, does that actually generate an extra income, even if the land is gifted for free? Because my understanding is it's quite a challenge to do that.
That's probably a different meeting. Probably
okay.
Everything's scrutinised. We've talked about that at length. I don't know if anybody wants to briefly comment on that.
I know there are members around the room that are very, very okay with the common policy on this one. So market housing is housing that a developer builds and put out to market and gets the optimum value for that property. In terms of affordable housing, current definition allows for such things as shared ownership, discount, first-time buyer, discount options. So there's a number of different tenure categories that fall into the affordable housing piece, but they are related to a discount on market value. Social housing rent would be the housing rent that we would charge, for example, on all of our council houses within the housing revenue account, and that is effectively a rent that is set by government.
Okay.
Which is significantly below the other two.
Good. And just a broad opinion on, if you were gifted the land and you had to build affordable housing, would that typically generate an additional income?
Affordable housing generates £30 million a year in York. Sorry, social housing in York generates 30 million. That is our housing revenue account budget. So it does generate an income.
No. If you had a site and you were gifted the land, after building it and then you sold it at affordable rates, does that typically generate an income?
So you're selling the housing for so not the social rent,
not the social rent,
the affordable housing rent.
Yeah,
it would all depend on the site, the costs associated with that site, number of units you were building. But generally speaking, I would say that affordable housing should cover its costs if you were gifted the land.
Okay, so it should cover its costs.
Yeah, I would have thought so. Okay. I mean, but again, I wouldn't want members to take that away as a given. I'm giving an opinion there based on experience.
And there'll be site specific.
I try to make it as broad as possible.
That's fine. Councillor Waller.
Sorry, could I just come back on the car parking numbers just before we move on, before they go out my head? So Castle Car Park has 327 spaces currently. So obviously, if that was closed completely, that's the number that would go. St George's Field has 267 currently. We think with reconfiguration, there could be between an extra 30 or 50 spaces by depending what decisions were taken on coach parking. So the difference is obviously what's lost overall. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the quick sums, Councillor Waller.
Thank you. Looking back at the proposals that have been over the years for this area, and 1948 local plan does make some. I'm not that old now, but it was proposing using that space for cultural use, which is very similar to what the public consultation has produced. And in terms of where the city hall would be built, the war intervened. There are various things that have worked through in terms of we are here now in a building which operates to provide a base to the scattered offices that we used to have. In terms of the way forward, the report in November, Councillor Kilbane has referenced the public consultation, the Castle Gateway scheme that took place. It's understanding, will the proposals move so far that a new consultation is required? And there's been discussion about earlier in this meeting in terms of partners, and I'm very aware that retailers have a lot of views on the proposal schemes within this. So it's understanding in November, what will there be in terms of public consultation going forward to get acceptance for this new interpretation of the proposals that came before the executive previously.
I'll leave Councillor Kilbane to pick up the vast majority of that. I'll deal with. I can deal with in terms of the. Sorry, it's gone there. Yeah, I'll leave it to Councillor Kilbane. Sorry, Pete.
Oh, that's okay. So yeah, as I say, there's a really good consultation done not very long ago at all, really, and not a lot has changed from that, Councillor Waller. The proposals that do get brought forward, I think, we're not going to suddenly be suggesting a multi-million-pound stadiums built on the site, because clearly we are in financial dire straits. So the proposals that come forward, I should imagine, will be quite modest. So we will need to, the consultation will reflect that. But in terms of the retailers, I think the issue is replacing the people in the city. If the cars do come out, and that's still an if, but if the cars do come out, then it's how to get those journeys coming back in. And there's actually a much bigger if for us as an administration, which is how do you replace the revenue that you're going to lose from that car park, which is substantial year on year. So, there are big questions that we will need to consult on and get to the bottom of and try and get as broad a consensus as we can on it, but then we will have to make a decision as to how we move the site forward for all the reasons that have been talked about here. And also the delinking of it also means that you can take it in those sort of bite-sized chunks as well.
Thank you. I've got two more hands. I'll take those last two questions and then we'll need to move on. Councillor Steels-Walshaw.
Yeah, it was just going back to the funding gap that we were talking about earlier, and I wondered if you could just let us know kind of what size we're looking at within that funding gap, like how big is it?
No, I'm afraid I can't, because the funding gap would be determined by the decisions taken by executive, and obviously the commitment in terms of the consultation that you've just heard there, what ultimately the decisions members take, but that would need to form part of any decision paper that officers brought forward to members before they've decided to recommence the project.
Thank you. And Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I'm trying to sneak one in. The more substantive one was around parking. So it is mentioned on page 19 that when that decision was taken in June 2022, there was further work to be done about parking, and it was always suggested that parking review, wider parking review of the whole city centre, of the whole city council car parks, would come back to scrutiny. I haven't seen anything that isn't there. There isn't any indication that scrutiny will get a chance to have that discussion about what the future is for all of the car parks in York, whether any particular ones will close. And would that review, as part of that, also include the council motion of December 19, which obviously requires the executive member to restrict all non-essential private motor vehicles within the city walls by 2023, which I think would rule out the use of Piccadilly car park as well as Castle car park.
Very happily pick that one up. Yeah, I'm quite surprised to be sat here and that motion from 2019 has not made any progress under the last administration, but be that as it may. It will, of course, in terms of your scaremongering around Piccadilly car park, which we frequently come across, depend upon what is an essential and what is a non-essential journey, and that those issues will be debated during the local transport plan. So the local transport plan will look at parking in the round for the whole city, because we need to take a city-wide approach and not just thinking sort of small pockets and with one-off ad hoc sort of interventions here and there. So that will be looked at around about the same time, actually, as part of that whole plan for transport and movements in the city. So, but ultimately, you know, if we are going to reduce traffic by 20%, freeing up the roads for people who need to use them, then we do need to reduce the number of journeys. And so thinking about how we strategically use parking is part of that programme. And obviously we will welcome all inputs into that review.
Thank you very much.
I think just to finish off is that, you know, there was, I think, a rather rash undertaking given by the previous administration that Castle Car Park wouldn't close until the parking was replaced. I think because of that commitment, we ended up with a white elephant being built on St George's Field, which was the multi-storey car park, which never stacked up. And the costs of that project are £850,000 for a project that was never really going to happen, and certainly shouldn't have happened. So we won't be taking forward any sort of wild ideas like that.
And then the one I wanted to sneak in, Chair, was the quick one around planning. So it's my understanding that it could progress without a need for a resubmission of planning. The Castle Mills development could actually continue with the existing planning permission. So it's a choice to take it back to planning is the essence.
The report highlights there's been a change in building regulations. So we could proceed, but there would need to be some amendments to the detailed design, and we'd have to seek planning officer views as to whether or not that would require a change in planning. If we were to try and maintain the ceiling heights within the building and comply with the new legislation, it would definitely need to go back to planning, because that would increase the expected height, and we've confirmed that with the planning officers. That would require a revised planning application. So the building regulations issue does play into that question.
Thank you. Right, I think we call this a day at that point. Thank you everyone for your questions. Thank you to officers and executive members for taking part in that discussion. Obviously there'll be a paper coming to executive in November. If there's a wish for that to come for pre-decision scrutiny, please let us know and we can figure out how that logistically how that might work. But I know in October, local transport strategy is coming to economy in place, access and transport. So some of the issues raised around parking may well be picked up in that discussion. So thank you very much. Thank you to Catherine and Sean. Hopefully it's been a interesting discussion to hear, and yeah, we look forward to your continued involvement. Thank you very much. Okay, so we now move on to agenda item 5, resident consultation and engagement. So if I can ask Claire Fall, who's presenting the report, and Councillor Douglas as the relevant executive member and council leader to join us at the table as well. So this is an item that was discussed in the previous iteration of this committee. We didn't have a chance to discuss it in the last municipal year, so it's been carried forward for this year, and we've been provided with a paper. Paragraph 5 sets out what we're invited to comment on, to note the contents of the report, consider requirements to ensure the local transport strategy consultation and engagement encourages the widest possible participation. And I know some members are sort of particularly keen to discuss how that particular consultation can be as engaging as possible. Consider any lessons learned as a result of the Blue Badge Access consultation, which I think is the consultation that recently closed. And to make any broader recommendations around how going forward the council can be the best it can be in terms of resident engagement, and recognising, before I forget, the point raised by the public speaker around the role of the talk about panel, which may be something you want to pick up as well. So if I leave you to introduce the report, Claire. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you everyone for inviting us here today. The report in front of you sets out a brief really about how the council engages on citywide consultations. It uses our big conversation, which took place over the previous 2 years, our big conversation transport, which has happened, the first stage has happened, and I'll come on to that shortly, and the Blue Badge consultation to provide an example of continuous learning. So you've also seen in the report some of the lessons that we've learned through the process. The consultation in itself draws from best practice, such as the Local Government Association's New Conversations Toolkit and the principles developed and tested during the My consultations that took place, such as My Castle Gateway, which was talked about earlier, and My York Central. It recognises that the recently approved council plan sets us officers a challenge to both listen and learn from residents and their experiences of the city, and to provide opportunity for residents and partners to shape policy and delivery to meet the agreed priorities. It shares work already undertaken to understand from community groups how to make sure as many voices are heard as possible throughout the local transport consultation, and that those groups were invited to, if you like, co-design aspects of the consultation plan. And you can see the difference they made and the conversation that they had in Annex A, which we provided to them as a kind of we asked, you said. We've also shared a draft checklist to help officers think through the purpose, principles and process of consulting, including the policy basis for the consultation itself, who to target and how to ensure that the consultation is inclusive and accessible, and that's in Annex B. We're going to invite Scrutiny, as you've just said, to share your observations, recommendations on how to develop particularly the local transport strategy consultation plan before it comes to transport scrutiny in October and then ultimately executive in November. And I'll just pause there, but I do have to make an apology, if that's okay, Chair, just a minute. I misnamed the York Disability Rights Forum on what is my page 12. So if that could be minuted, it is York Disability Rights Forum and not as I wrote in the paper. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Claire. Members, this is your opportunity to shape the way that the council consults and engages. Councillor Taylor, I'll bring you in first.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for this report. I didn't quite fully get the brief, but I was anticipating a report that would cover how the council sort of speaks to residents and consults with residents about all things rather than these sort of more flagship projects, which is fine. So I wanted to sort of put in a bit of a pitch for those other things. So one thing, and I know it's not the core of the report, but I'm raising it because we're talking about engaging with residents. One thing I think council comms really falls short on, and when I say comms, I don't mean your department comms, I mean the council as a whole. Things like when you get like letters about traffic regulation orders or notices or local planning decisions or changes to waste services, the types of things that are sent by the actual services themselves rather than comms, the way we put them out is often atrocious. Like the tone of it is like it's been written by a robot, or what's it called, chat. Yeah, that probably do a better job, to be fair. We could ask it might save a bit of money. So you know, is there any way we could improve on that front? And not just in terms of tone, but also in terms of amount. So we always do the bare minimum with planning notices. So it, you know, a key change in an area will be stuck on the most obscure lamppost somewhere. And then we have to say to people, well, there was a consultation window and the council did do their legal obligation, even though the minimum obligation often doesn't match with decent practice. And I just think that's something that gets missed in this kind of conversation. You're able to say anything to that? I know it's a bit rambly, but that's me.
No, thank you, Councillor Taylor. No, totally understand your point. And I was actually talking to colleagues about this today. In the newly approved council plan, we've been set another challenge, which is to make sure that improved customer experience drives everything we do. And we're starting to set out what does that actually mean? What's the scope of that? Where does that touch? What kind of services does that touch? And actually, you very neatly summed up the problem of customer experience that isn't as good as it could be. So where the tone's not right, there's too much communications, it's not particularly clear, all those sorts of things. And I think on a different day, we might need to come back to you and explain what our improved customer experience programme might look like. At the very starting point, we're looking at, for example, what's the reading age? What national standards already exist? How can we help? In my previous world, we used to call it failure demand, but how can you reduce the number of calls that come into the customer services team, or the wrong forms, or the misinformation that comes in from residents who just don't know what they're supposed to do, and therefore introduce cost into the council that actually, if we improved our customer communications at a frontline basis, so each operations, we might actually take some of that cost out of the council, but better, we might improve customer experience. So I haven't got an answer. I can just tell you that we know it's a problem and we're looking at it.
Just to add to that, do talk to councillors, because invariably it's when a resident receives an officious or sometimes incorrect letter, they'll talk to their councillor. We then have to, it's another issue that we have to put on the plate of an already hard-stretched technical officer, and it's often the technical officers who are communicating this information, and bless them, it's not always their forte in terms of crafting a message from the resident's perspective. It's communicating technical information, and if that lands badly, then it can colour the residency of all the council does, and I think that's a challenge for us. Councillor Merritt.
I think that certainly echoes one of the issues. You've talked at the, and it picks up Councillor Callum Taylor's point, the vast majority of consultations are run internally with the cost of officer time only. And you've got in the appendices a sort of template to try and direct officers in the right direction. But is there potentially a role for the central team to do a bit of quality control in terms of exactly picking up the type of issues that Councillor Fenton's talked about, and ensuring that we do have a much better quality of communications and consultations, and that is consistent across all departments. And I think there's another issue that whilst the council website flags some of the major consultations, quite often there are other consultations, I think, that are done separately departmentally that actually aren't flagged on the council consultation webpage, and people miss them, or you then find quite late in the process that there's this other consultation going on that you didn't know about, despite having looked at the council current consultation page. So I think there is a need to get a much stronger grip on this whole area, and I welcome obviously the first steps that are being made, but I think it's actually got to go quite some way further. I think there are other things, of course, also about understanding, I think, by a lot of departments about the different levels of consultation and where co-production might be, and those higher levels might be appropriate. I mean, I think quite often traffic schemes are the type of scheme where the public only gets to know when the final stage is there and the black and white proposals come out. Now, for some things, simple things, that's probably reasonable, but actually for some of the more complex traffic schemes, you clearly need to get people on board earlier on if you're going to get an acceptable scheme and not as Stephen says, end up with something that then consumes an enormous amount of resources. And you can think of some of the consultations in other areas where we've run into exactly that sort of problem, as I think we were flagged by one of the speakers at the beginning. So those are some initial comments. I think coming back to the big consultations, I mean, you flagged the big consultations in the table, but you've not flagged how many people actually were engaged and came back. And I know from when I looked at some of the engagement figures, the numbers were in the hundreds. For what were meant to be citywide consultations. I know in the past, when to be fair, there were rather more resources available. We got consultation responses in the thousands, which were perhaps definitely more representative of what the population as a whole, and more importantly, had engaged much larger sections of the population than these recent ones. So in terms of lessons learned, there doesn't seem to be very much comment on how many people we've actually engaged with, how we can do better on that, how we compare with other councils in terms of best practice achievements on these important citywide consultations.
Who wants to have a go at that? I suppose it's a sort of related question is around how you let the people who may and should be interested in the issue know that this, whether it's postcode specific, whether it's different ways of focusing messaging through neighbourhood routes in terms of the extent to which the council makes use of. There's a whole plethora of community pages, some more official than others, but that tends to be where a lot of people get their news and interactions. But yeah, welcome any thoughts on the issues that Councillor Merritt raised?
Shall I break it down into 3 lumps, if that's possible?
As you wish, yeah.
Yeah, so the first lump about, or the first theme around how do we make sure people are engaged, you're quite right. Some of our consultations are really well engaged with. So if we take waste collection, I think we had 7,000 respondents to that a couple of years ago. If we take the 10-year strategies, we had just about 600. If we take the our big conversation attitudinal survey, we had about 2,000. So it varies massively depending on what it is we're talking about, how easy it is to get into, the kind of level of commitment, if you like, of the resident who has to maybe go through quite a long and lengthy questionnaire versus something quite short and sharp and easy to get into. And that's something that we've learned definitely for the local transport strategy. So we're going to provide multiple routes into that consultation. Not expecting everybody to read the whole strategy, for example, but just pick up on key themes or things that might be interesting to a particular demographic. In terms of quality control, I think you said, or quality control and a stronger grip, I suppose, are similar issues. At the moment, we really manage a kind of distributed communications with a little c and consultation with a little c process, in the sense that operations and services particularly run their own customer communications or their own consultations. There is oversight in the sense that we've got a single SurveyMonkey platform, but it's not really quality control in the sense that I think you're discussing. We're hoping the checklist helps with that, but we do recognise we do need a stronger grip, and if that doesn't work and we find ourselves in the same situation, we're going to have to be a lot firmer in terms of introducing like a panel. Things don't get published unless certain things get put in place. In terms of strengthening the actual corporate centre as a whole to be able to support this, including flagging it across the website, making sure that we don't over consult at any one time, all of those sorts of issues. If you think that, for example, we might have 60 consultations live at any one time, and that excludes planning applications or licensing applications, which is obviously a fairly heavy consultation programme. Where we sit right now, we don't have the resources in place to allow us to do that. I think one of the things we're going to have to take away following this scrutiny, if you all kind of concur, is that we'll need to look at how we reshape ourselves to allow ourselves to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Healy.
Mike, very specific question. I completed the blue badge access consultation, and I believe the very first question was, are you happy with the current arrangements? Yes, no. I said yes. I then think I made a mistake because I then filled in the rest of the survey. So could you, when you publish the results, do something like first question, you know, yes, no, number. And if someone said yes, when you count that for the subsequent questions, you sort of put that in a bracket. Because really, if I'm happy with the current arrangements, then the other options don't really apply.
Who'd like to? Councillor Thomas, would you like to answer that?
I think, Councillor Healy, I can kind of understand your logic there, but if this is a consultation where we're asking people about their views on different options, we shouldn't discount somebody's views on options just because they have a particular view on one of them. So if you're saying, yes, you're happy with the current arrangements, that doesn't mean oh, that's it. Councillor Healy has said he is happy with the current options. We're just going to forget the whole thing now. It may be that different options are taken forward, and we would still want to encompass your views from the consultation about those different parameters, no matter what you said to the first question. So I think, you know, it is important that we do include the data that we got from the consultation, no matter whether people said yes or no to the first question.
I'm not saying disregard. I'm just saying put it as a separate figure, maybe in brackets or something. Just acknowledge.
Yeah, there's probably ways you can cut data.
Yeah,
but sometimes the data doesn't always tell the whole story.
It doesn't, and I'm just trying to bring clarity.
That's fine. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you. I'm just sort of following on from some of Councillor Merritt's thoughts and then some particular questions about the local transport strategy consultation. Councillor Merritt asked a question about how many people were reaching through these consultations, but what I'm really interested in is who we're missing. Is it representative of the data that we're getting through? Are there certain types of people that are less likely to fill it in, and how do we reach those people? So that was my first thought. Then the other question was around the local transport strategy consultation. So in paragraph 27 in the report, you mentioned about an engagement plan and you list a number of different actions. One of the things that I've noticed that's completely missing is use of social media. Do we have a plan to kind of engage with that and utilize it to be most effective? And then sort of going off the back of that, in one of the annexes, it mentions about best practice utilizing a comms plan. I don't know if I've missed anything in the report, but it doesn't say if we actually have a comms plan in place to go forward with these sorts of consultations. And then also, I think one of the other things that I thought was missing was there was no sort of public meeting that was mentioned on the list.
Thank you. Thank you. So in terms of, so I start with representation and just work through. So in terms of representation, with our big conversation one, the attitudinal survey, we recognised that there were a number of groups that hadn't taken part. And we ran separate focus groups for those individuals. We ran 8 different focus groups covering all sorts of different communities, and that's published in the open data platform, so you can see the report. On that experience, we realised that a number of groups don't engage. So for the local transport strategy consultation phase 1, we went out to 8 different community groups and asked them how to make sure that the consultation was as representative as possible. And they've given us loads of different activities to make sure we do, most of which are face-to-face workshops, focus groups, engagement sessions where people can do kind of a show and tell, all sorts of different ways, but mostly face-to-face rather than online. one of the biggest groups that haven't engaged traditionally in any of our consultations is a sort of young person bracket, if you like. We've worked really closely with colleges and universities to try and get messages out, but it just doesn't always land. More recently, for the local transport strategy, we went to the Youth Council and we asked them, how would you get young people engaged in transport when transport is quite a dry subject? And what came back overwhelmingly was to start on a safety basis. So the Youth Council, when we met them, was predominantly girls of ages between 16 and 21-ish. And they told us that actually for them, the transport system doesn't feel safe. So instead of talking about transport, if we talk about safety, we're more likely to get more younger people engaged. And it's finding out about those different things that will trigger people to think, actually, this is something for me and not something that doesn't touch me or doesn't impact me. In terms of the local transport strategy engagement plan, social media, you're absolutely right. We use social media all the time. We've got something like 43,000 followers on Twitter, sorry, X. I know X might be on its way out. So we've also got Facebook. We've got about, I think, 14,000 on Facebook, about 4,000 or 5,000 on Instagram. We haven't gone anywhere near TikTok or Snapchat. My cat's on TikTok. I don't know if that matters. But so, you know, we're experimenting with it, but we haven't experimented with it with council comms yet. But we do use council channels quite significantly for both driving people to the consultation itself so they can fill out the survey or get involved in groups, and to do little polls and little kind of what do you think, and share us your information and things like that. So we do use social media quite a lot, which brings us to the next point. And you're absolutely right. I haven't shared the comms plan for the local transport strategy, and we'll add that as an annex when we go to scrutiny, transport and economy scrutiny, because it's really important they go together, because obviously one's about sending information out and one's about bringing people back to sort of tell us what they think. In terms of a public meeting, the local transport strategy consultation plan at the moment has 3, we're calling them summits planned. One for parents, if you like, and teachers. So we talk about transport around schools and how you might want to minimise transport around schools. One talks to businesses, particularly around freight. I think I want to say, I'm like Councillor Kilbane because it's his plan. And then one talks to residents more generally. So 2 are very themed and targeted, one's much more general. We're also thinking, I think, of doing a member show and tell, where we actually support all the members to understand, like collectively, both the local transport strategy consultation plan, the local transport strategy kind of principles and policies that we're promoting, we're consulting on, but then also how ward members might like to get involved. So we're hoping to put together, for example, we are putting together toolkits so that ward members can take a discussion into a ward committee and have a conversation with your own members, your own people that turn up at your ward meetings.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to come back, yes, Councillor Kelly?
Yeah, no, that was really helpful. Thank you. I just had one follow-up question. One of the things, again, in the engagement plan was the online engagement platform. Now, I've seen it in the past when these sorts of things have been created and they look really shiny and they're great, but no one actually engages with them. It's about kind of how you get them out. So is there a plan to sort of distribute that? I suppose that might come through the comms plan, through social media, etc.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Websites are useless if nobody visits them. So so the online platform we're using is Delib. It's online, you can all have a look at it. It involves both polls, questionnaires and geospatial maps. So people can put little pins on areas that are difficult for them. So we're going to be, for example, asking the disabled community to tell us where they find problems and where they find issues in the transport system. We'll ask school children the same question and get a different response. We'll ask bus users, everybody, to provide different points of access to the online engagement platform. The online engagement platform, if you like, is at the heart of the consultation. So all of our comms will point towards it, provide links, QR codes, all that sort of thing, so you can get into it easily, as well as social media. our offline communication, so our face-to-face workshops, our focus groups, all those sorts of things, again, will signpost the consultation. But if people choose not to use it, the offline communications and consultation materials will match into the online online platform, and we'll have a team of data inputters taking the offline information and sticking it into the online platform, because actually having a single point of truth, if you like, of what everybody says that we can cut in different ways will be really powerful to help us build both a deep insight around how people use the transport system and the barriers and the opportunities they think within the city as it is, for the local transport strategy, but also to think about it in terms of a really rich source of information for a potential or for the movement plan, and what that might mean and what that might look like.
Thank you. Okay, so a follow on, Councillor Burton. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that reading in paragraph 22, you got a list of things A to I, which I thought actually I was really pleased to read. Only consult or engage if the council is prepared to listen and change the approach. And there's a whole list of things here that I recognise from being in groups that were asked, how can we improve things? And I think if you follow these principles, then you're well on your way to doing having a better representation of what people are saying to you. Also, I think a plan to get people who are not digitally engaged is important. I know you mentioned, or somebody mentioned, going around on the bus, taking, with an iPad and noting down what people said, who would be willing to spare a few minutes. And it's quite labour intensive, but it's quite a good way of finding out what people really think, or at bus stops as well, randomly.
Who'd like to respond to that?
And it sounds like, and I think I now recognise you, that you were at the York Access Forum group that I spoke to. No?
I was at the TAG group and the YDRF.
Right, I've spoken,
yes.
yeah. I've spoken.
And I think also at Reverse the Banter,
Yeah.
I've bombarded you, and it's nice to see that some of the things I've recommended are in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. And thank you to your colleagues and other people that came to the different networks. We took it all on board, and it's made a big difference. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say that is a really important part of what we want to see as a kind of transformation programme through how the council communicates with residents, listens to them, and also, as Claire said earlier, about that customer experience is responded to as well. So that's within the council plan, and it's an absolute commitment now from both the executive and also officers to deliver on that over the coming years. So I'm looking forward to seeing residents feel as though there's an improved experience for them.
Thank you. Councillor Waller.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on the social media aspect, not everyone is on social media, and there is so much social media that even those people who are on will not necessarily get your message because there is so much noise. So it's really understanding the mechanisms that you're going to build in so that you're getting an alert that some groups, some communities, some geographic areas are not participating in the way that it would have been very obvious in the olden days when there was only the evening press in Radio York and questionnaires that were paper based, and that was in some ways easier to keep track of. So it's understanding how you will use technology to make sure that you are getting representative samples, and that's where the Talk About panel was always a useful backup for, in terms of if the Talk About panel figures were very different to the way the numbers were coming in from elsewhere, you could actually see it in live time.
Thank you. So we'll use the Talk About panel. We'll invite them to take part in the survey. We'll also invite everybody else. So it's much broader than just Talk About. The way we'll do it is we'll essentially take people's demographics off the online platform and see whether it's representative according to the census 2021 data. So we know, of course, what the percentage populations are and the different percentage demographics compared to percentage as a whole. The way we'll target, if we don't get sufficient uptake for young people, for LGBTQ, for disabled people, whoever, we'll have to start targeting directly to their community groups. But we're already got a programme of going directly to community groups to ask them, A, to take part in the survey itself, and then also to share with their members. So we're hoping to get to dementia cafes, for example. We're hoping to get to different explore sites across the city. So we've got public information on boards in the libraries. We talked about bus stops, street corners. You know, we're not containing ourselves to just social media and council channels, unlike other surveys that we've done in the past. This is much broader and bigger than that. Because if we're completely honest, the DfT are funding it. So we've got funding that we can invest into time and capacity to get out there and to go and meet everybody and make sure that we give everybody the chance to participate. The difficulty we've got, I think, is something for Scrutiny to consider, is this local transport strategy is likely to be best in class because we've got that funding in real time. With ever reducing council budgets, how can we make sure we still hear from everybody for all of the different programmes that we've got to deliver through the council plan when we don't have that additional funding and that additional capacity to support us? And I haven't got an answer for that yet.
Councillor Merry, is that supplementary or new question?
So it's partly supplementary.
Okay,
It just comes to thought that we've got a well-funded exercise. Will there be element of that being used for monitoring and actually seeing which of the avenues prove effective or not, which might help you in the other consultations where we don't have the same level of resource? Just one particular thought, but in terms of public speakers early on, Gwen Swinburne asked about the Talk About panel and raised some questions on that. I think that might be might be a useful point for you to pick up and answer those questions if that's possible. And Phil Bixby also made some wide-ranging points about our consultation processes. When you spoke earlier, you said you might come back on a new customer experience plan, if I remember what you said. Will that customer experience plan specifically include a section on consultation and engagement and perhaps responding to some of the issues that have been raised around this table as part of the overall plan? And can we be notified when it's coming, so perhaps we can arrange for you to come back and to see whether the issues that have been raised around this table have been addressed in it?
So the customer experience plan and movement on that, we're really very keen that it covers areas where people of all types touch the council and experience anything that we either deliver or they receive from us services. So that will be council taxpayers, our tenants, businesses, etc. And of course, consultation and engagement is a big part of that. So I thoroughly expect it to be part of that plan, but it's under consideration and development at the moment. That's yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Widdowson.
A comment that I picked up frequently over about the last year is that people who either aren't residents here or who aren't tourists in the city don't understand how they get engaged in the consultations. So they feel like they're bypassed. Are there any plans to look at that? So for instance, they live out towards Beverley and they come in and there's lots that we're doing. I'm just picking up on the fact that you're talking about transport at the moment. There's lots that we're doing, but they don't feel like they're involved or consulted. They come to the city, they work but they're not involved or consulted in what we're doing because they're neither a resident nor a tourist. Do you have plans in that area?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Widdowson. So you're talking about commuters, basically. So
Shoppers.
yeah, so
shoppers.
they need to have a relationship with York in some sense, otherwise we probably don't really need to
Well,
consult
yes,
them.
they'll come and they'll work in the city, but only 2 or 3 days a week now.
Okay. So we'll have the business summit. So we'll be inviting people through FSB chamber, usually the the business newsletter, all those sorts of things to get involved in a kind of online session. We'll have I think we've mentioned it, people at bus stops in public spaces sharing information. We'll ask the FSB and chamber and other networks to share the fact that this is happening, and we'll share it through the business newsletter anyway, which now goes out to I think about 3,500 people. And we'll ask obviously through the business network to share with their people. That's probably about all I can think of right now, but we'll have to think about, I guess, other ways of communicating with commuters. I know we've talked about internally whether we take over any of the parking boards, you know, that say, yeah, so use some of our natural signage, if you like, to sort of draw attention to it.
Thank you. Yeah.
And just on a completely different point, picking up the fact that at the moment, you've got 60 consultations going on, and we have consulted on numerous different projects across the city for many, many years. How do you guard against fatigue of people going, do you know what, we elected them, could they just do it? Or we didn't elect them, could they just not do it, or whatever, you know, I'm not playing anymore.
That's a really important point about consultation fatigue. The way we're managing it at the moment is to share, we asked, you said we did, but that doesn't happen on all consultations. That only happens on the big citywide ones. The smaller ones, the changes to school transport, the changes to traffic lights, you know, the smaller ones, that some of them are statutory and some of them are not. We don't have the capacity or the reach to engage people in the kind of we said, we asked, you said, we did kind of activity. I suspect what we'll find through the local transport strategy is whether people have got fatigued and whether they are tired of it. Like I said, the previous consultations, it shows that if people are interested in the subject, they will respond. So 7,000 people responding to the waste survey. We're still in the context of, you know, 60 odd surveys taking place. So it's not that people aren't interested, it's only they're interested in the things they're interested in.
So supplementary, Councillor Eyre?
Yeah, I think it was a note of caution. I was going to mention that earlier. That's can be one of the problems with consultations, is that you only get the feedback from the people that are interested. And I think on many things like this, it will actually be the people who are not interested in doing it. Are they actually the ones you need to target the most? So it's just a further challenge for you.
Yeah, it's I suppose if you're asking people about bus services, you're as interested in those who don't use bus services as you are in those who do, and that's. But then where do you find them? Because they won't be at the bus stop, so it's.
One of the
exactly.
Chair, we talked to the community transport group who provide community transport for people who typically don't or can't use transport themselves, and they actually gave us the challenge for people who can't leave home. So how do you engage people who, for whatever reason, are not able to leave home, their homes, and they would wish to participate in York Life, but they can't. So how do we engage them? And we're working through how we actually reach people who are in that situation in a way that isn't intimidating, isn't council coming down heavy, but is supportive, wants people to participate, and provides them with an open door to kind of share their thoughts. So yeah, there's lots of challenges around transport, not just people who use it, but people who don't.
One more supplementary, if that's what it is. Yeah.
Just a piece of advice, I suppose, is doing engagement on a day-to-day basis is make sure you're talking to partners, because those in particular, there will be other people that are interacting with those people. And you're right, it wouldn't be right for the councils to be the ones that turn up, but there will be people. And a lot of the services and our partners that we have across the city, be that NHS, be that fire, be that police, etc., will be round and about and engaging with people. And actually, if we can work together in terms of making those communications and facilitating those conversations.
Thank you. Councillor Taylor.
Thanks, Chair. I've just got 3 points to raise, if I may, or I think they're more requests than points, hopefully to feed into future work. So on this local transport strategy, I think the first thing I'd say is at every possible opportunity you get, ram all the available opportunities for involvement and consultation down every single councillor's throats. Because if this is going to have any value, it needs to stand the test of time beyond elections. And we can't have any councillor saying, you didn't make it easy for me to get involved myself or get my community involved. And, you know, we're all mad busy, so the emails can be a bit, you know, things get missed. So, I mean, it might sound obvious, but I just think we've got to be wise to that. Second point I'd like to raise is I'd be interested to see how you're going to approach sort of weighing up input. So, you know, if I don't have the analogy matches, but I'll give it a go. If I want to like find out the best way of making a cake, I will put more weight on the input of people who know how to bake, rather than someone who, you know, works down a local steelworks, for example. Local steelworks, I don't think we have any here. But you get the point. So, you know, to bring this into this conversation, if we have parts of a city where we know speeding is a problem, and one person says, I don't want speed calming measures because they're going to slow my car down, and another person says, I'd like my area to be safer, we've got to have a clear priority there and do what's right. And that's just my view, but I'd be interested to see how we're going to handle those kind of trade-offs. And lastly, I should stress as well, I'm liking everything I'm hearing. I think you've got a massive challenge on your hands, but I feel like a lot of the frustrations that have been raised over the years are finally starting to land. And I think future comms with major projects need to have a genuine connection to the politicians accountable to those projects and all the people involved in those projects. So the My Castle Gateway work has been rightly credited. That was a very good example of community engagement, and hats off to those who ran that. But what I would challenge is, you know, the My York Central project has been cited at the top of page 29. Now, in my view, the My York Central process was quite heartbreaking, because the actual consultation and engagement with residents that was done by the people running it, who are in this room tonight, was excellent. And they managed to get all sorts of residents involved, not just from Holgate Ward, but from beyond. But to be honest, the inputs that so many residents and councillors put into that, very few actually came out as part of what we're now dealing with York Central. And that's probably for a whole host of reasons. But one reason I would say is the executive at the time, well, we've had multiple executives over that time, have had very little interest in what the people on the ground were actually saying. We can't afford to repeat that mistake. Not to rant aimlessly, it matters, because if you waste opportunities like that, when you go back for more, there's a cynicism, and it's so hard to turn around. So, you know, for the next big one, let's just bear that in mind. That's all I'd say. Thank you.
Anyone like to respond to Councillor Taylor's point?
The online engagement platform will publicly share inputs all the time, so anyone can go in and have a look, see where it's waiting, see what people are saying. The challenging of balancing all that up, thankfully, isn't my job. That'll be for members to balance up what they're presented, is the feedback, and decide on the decisions that they need to make. I mean, it'll be open and transparent on the online engagement platform, and I guess it's a consideration for members. I think Councillor Kilbane's not here now, but for Councillor Kilbane to consider how he wants that presented in the reports, really. So yeah, I completely hear what you're saying. I completely understand that there's a way of showing the input and the feedback collected through community engagement in a way that helps inform decision making, and that shows that balance. And that's something I think we need to take away and consider how to do best or better.
Thank you. I think one thing I would add in terms of framing is very important, particularly around transport. Because everyone has a view and lots of people are experts. But it's something that, and you can see by the way that the media covers transport related, what may be fairly innocent news release around road repairs becomes roads misery. And I think some how the consultation is framed is going to be really important. I don't know whether you sort of pre-brief media in terms of, and the media can quite rightly print exactly what they want, but in terms of setting the narrative as to what this consultation is and is not, being clear about the sort of the parameters of it and what the journey is to get to a refreshed transport plan. But I think it's particularly challenging in areas around transport, which a lot of people are passionate about, on not always on the same side of the argument. Is going to be a challenge, but one I think that members are up for. Does anyone else have any other comments that they'd like to throw into the mix while we have this opportunity? But I'm sure it's an issue we will come back to. No, Councillor Merritt.
Just conscious in terms of conclusions. I had thought perhaps beforehand that this was one where we might consider a deep dive, a smaller working group, but I actually think we've explored it extremely thoroughly this evening. I think in terms of our decisions, perhaps the one thing that we ought to specifically decide is to ask for that further report as and when that engagement customer strategy is prepared, and have some opportunity to see it before it goes to the executive, preferably.
Okay, does that sound all right?
Yeah.
Good. Okay, thank you for that. I think that brings us to the end of agenda item 5. Thank you, Councillor Douglas and Claire, for your participation. Agenda item 6 is the scrutiny work plan. So this is the the first time that this committee's had the opportunity in a public document to see what is on the agenda for scrutiny for the rest of this calendar year. This is a product of some hard work put in by chairs and vice chairs of all the scrutiny committees, so thank you for that. This is not set in stone. New issues may come up. There may be requests from executive for pre-decision scrutiny, which obviously we will endeavour to respond to, because it's important that we take advantage of opportunities to influence decisions rather than just talk about them after the event. So that's really for members to note, and release an open invitation for members on this committee and elsewhere, and members of the public, if there are things that we should be looking at within the time and resource available that we're not, then we should be open to new ideas and suggestions, and we can see how we can incorporate them either as items at meetings or topics for task and finish groups that could be on a quite specific and time limited nature.
Yeah.
Yes, Councillor Healy.
We've got 4 items on the
microphone. You'll get the hang of it then.
Well, eventually. We've got 4 items to consider in the October meeting, but only 2 in November. Do you think we should slip one from October to November?
What we've got in November, York Central and devolution. It's really difficult ahead of the meeting to know how much time each item will take. When I'm sure many of us did the scrutiny training earlier, a couple of months ago, where we were told you should really only have two items on each agenda. So we've done today, and it's late. The October papers, the blue badge applications paper will be a paper from Pauline Stutchfield that will set out how the current process works, not necessarily for a discussion, but potentially to inform some work by a task and finish group to consider some of the issues that that certainly members are aware of through either their sort of personal experiences or interaction with others. So I don't anticipate that will take a huge amount of time. Voter ID, we will be receiving a report from officers setting out what impacts there were as a result of the new regulations that required photographic ID. It'll also be an opportunity for members to raise questions or concerns, particularly about distribution of postal votes. We're not the decision makers in terms of that, but I think we have a role in terms of representing to the authority concerns that are raised with us by residents. Climate change, I'm conscious that this climate change is now the responsibility of this committee, and there are some specific items that were referred to us by full council in relation to, it was measurement, interim targets. Thank you, Councillor Merritt. So I'm fingers crossed we'll manage if I chair the meeting effectively, but we'll see. So I'm hopeful, but as with all these things, it's really hard to second guess. Yeah, no, and we know we should challenge. You know, is that the right mix of topics? Any other comments on the work plan, Councillor Merritt?
Yes, just echo what you said. I mean, it is a difficult judgment. We had discussions about some of this. Some of them are linked to timescales, so are where they are because of that, and that doesn't necessarily make things easy. And we thought the November one were both two very substantial items, and I think we were keen not to end up with too much on the November agenda. But as a consequence, we have a rather full October one. Hopefully, some of those are a bit shorter. Yeah. Just two other things. Gwen Swinburne made a comment about us being aware and keeping track of the council plan in terms of forward scrutiny items. Maybe we can, just as a reminder, have a link to the council plan at the top of the scrutiny work plan page that will remind us of that and make sure that we do positively think about what forward items that we ought to be having on the agenda. The other thing I'm conscious of, I wasn't particularly aware until I saw the minutes. There was an outstanding issue of looking at Section 106 agreements.
Yes.
And I know there are a number of concerns about those that led to that original request. Certainly have my own concerns. Perhaps that's one we should look to perhaps see if we can identify a slot later on in the programme.
I think we've got it in March, if memory serves, of next year.
Right. I don't remember.
But it's on the list. We
Yeah.
might have the opportunity to bump it up, but it's on there.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay. Agenda item 7, urgent business. I'm not aware of any urgent business. So thank you, members of the public, officers, democratic services colleagues, for your participation and contribution, and